Kim Bei-ho woke before dawn as he had for 40 years, his weathered hands reaching for the same worn boots beside his bed. The 60-year-old farmer lived alone in the mountains of Gangwon province, where the nearest neighbor was 5 kilometers away, and the silence was broken only by roosters and mountain wind. He preferred it this way. People were complicated. Plants and animals made sense. That October morning felt different. The air hummed with an electric tension that made his goats restless and his chickens refuse to leave their coop. The night. Before, streaks of blue and white light had torn across the sky like falling stars, but these lights moved too slowly, too deliberately. They pulsed with an unnatural rhythm that made Bei-ho's teeth ache. He stepped outside to check his cabbage field, the frost crunching under his boots. The morning mist clung to the mountains like ghosts, and everything seemed too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing. That's when he saw the crater. It wasn't large, maybe 3 meters across, perfectly circular, and still smoking slightly. The earth around it was blackened, but not burned. More like it had been kissed by something. Impossibly cold. Strange symbols were etched into the soil, glowing faintly before fading as the sun rose higher. But the crater wasn't what made Bei-ho's heart stop. It was what lay beside it. 3 infants, naked and impossibly serene, arranged in a perfect triangle on his frost-covered cabbages. They should have been blue with cold, crying, dying. Instead, their skin held a subtle shimmer that shifted from pale human tones to silver in the changing light. Their eyes, larger than any human baby's, tracked his movement with an intelligence that made his spine tingle. Bei-ho had never married, never had children, but something deep in his chest pulled tight at the sight of them. The protective instinct surprised him with its intensity. He knelt beside the smallest one, a girl, and touched her cheek. Warm, impossibly warm despite the frost. The moment his skin touched hers, images flashed through his mind. Stars burning out, ships fleeing across vast darkness, hands placing these children gently on his earth before vanishing into light. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left him breathless and strangely emotional. He wrapped the first infant in his thick work shirt, then the second in his jacket. For the third, the biggest boy, he used his undershirt, not caring about the cold biting his skin. Their weight felt normal, human, but when he lifted them, they made no sound. No crying, no fussing, just those large dark eyes watching him with what seemed like gratitude. Back in his small farmhouse, Bei-ho laid them on his bed and stoked the fire until the room was warm. He tried his phone. Dead. The radio produced only static. Even his old battery-powered emergency radio caught nothing but white noise. Whatever had happened in the sky had knocked out all communication. The infants arranged themselves naturally, their tiny hands reaching toward each other whenever he tried to separate them. When he placed the girl between the 2 boys, all 3 relaxed visibly, their strange shimmer becoming more pronounced. They seemed to be having a conversation without words, their eyes moving in patterns that suggested complex communication. Bei-ho had goats, so he warmed fresh milk and offered it to them. They drank eagerly, their small hands surprisingly strong as they gripped the bottles. The biggest boy, who Bei-ho decided to call Woo Jin after his grandfather, finished first and seemed to smile, actually smile, at the old farmer. Woo Jin, Bei-ho said softly, and the infant's eyes brightened as if he understood. The second boy he named Haewon, and the girl became Nari. Each time he spoke their names, they responded with what could only be recognition. As the day progressed, Bei-ho noticed more strangeness. The children never cried. When they needed changing, they simply looked at him with patient eyes until he understood. When they were hungry, they made soft humming sounds that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Most unnaturally, they slept in perfect synchronization, their breathing matching exactly. That evening, as Bei-ho sat watching them sleep in the wooden crib he'd hastily assembled from old farm tools, he saw lights in the sky again. These moved differently than the night before, searching, hunting, circling his valley like predators. The infants stirred in their sleep, their shimmer flickering like candlelight in wind. Woo Jin opened his eyes and looked directly at Bei-ho. For a moment, the old farmer could have sworn he heard a voice in his mind, young but determined. "Appa, Protect us." Beiho reached out and gently stroked the boy's forehead. "I will," he whispered, not caring how impossible it all seemed. These weren't just alien children who'd fallen from the sky. They were his children now, and Kim Beiho had never backed down from protecting what was his. The changes started on the third day. Beiho woke to find the children had outgrown their makeshift clothes overnight. What had been tiny infants were now the size of 6-month-old babies, their eyes even more alert and intelligent. By the end of the first week, they were crawling with perfect coordination, moving together like a small pack of wolves. Beiho had to expand their sleeping area twice in 10 days. He fashioned larger clothes from his old farming coveralls, watching in amazement as Wu Jin stood upright on wobbly legs, then walked across the room as if he'd been doing it for years. Haewon followed minutes later, his movements precise and calculated. Nari took her first steps while humming a melody that made the houseplants seem to lean toward her voice. By the second week, they looked like healthy 2-year-olds. Their strange shimmer had settled into a subtle glow that appeared strongest when they were happy or excited. They still didn't speak, but their communication had evolved into complex gestures and expressions that Beiho found himself understanding, instinctively. The morning Beiho discovered Wu Jin feeding the chickens without being asked, he nearly dropped his coffee mug. The boy, now appearing about 4 years old, scattered grain with perfect technique, while making soft clicking sounds that had the normally aggressive rooster eating peacefully from his palm. When Beiho approached, Wu Jin looked up with a smile and pointed to each chicken, then held up fingers indicating exactly how many eggs each hen had laid that week. Haewon's growth was equally startling but different. The quiet boy had discovered Beiho's small collection of books and sat absorbed in pages he shouldn't have been able to understand. Korean text, English magazines left by previous visitors, even an old Chinese farming manual. Haewon studied, them all with the same intense focus. When Beiho tested him by pointing to Korean letters, the boy would trace them in the air and somehow convey their meaning through gestures, but it was Nari who showed the most mysterious ability. The little girl had begun humming constantly, wordless melodies that seemed to affect everything around her. The vegetables in Beiho's garden grew visibly larger when she sat among them. Wilted flowers straightened and bloomed. Even the old apple tree that hadn't produced fruit in 5 years suddenly sprouted new buds. One morning, Beiho watched her place her small hands on a sickly goat kid that had been refusing milk. Nari's humming took on a different tone, almost like a lullaby, and the kid's labored breathing eased. Within an hour it was standing and nursing normally. Beiho had seen many things in his 60 years, but nothing like this. The children's growth accelerated through the third week. They now appeared to be 5 or 6 years old, their coordination perfect, and their understanding of their environment sophisticated. Wu Jin could predict weather changes by watching the animals' behavior. Haewon had begun writing Korean characters with remarkable skill, copying text from books and creating new combinations that somehow conveyed complex ideas. Nari's songs had developed into elaborate wordless compositions that seemed to tell stories. The incident that changed everything happened on a sunny Thursday morning. Beiho was repairing loose shingles on his roof when he noticed Wu Jin climbing up to help. The boy moved with surprising agility, handing tools and holding boards with the competence of an experienced assistant. That's when the old ladder shifted. Wu Jin fell 12 feet onto the stone patio below, landing with a sickening crack that made Beiho's heart stop. The farmer scrambled down faster than his old bones should have allowed, expecting to find broken bones or worse. Instead, he found Wu Jin sitting up, dazed but alert. Deep cuts on the boy's arms and forehead were bleeding, but as Beiho watched, in stunned silence, the wounds began closing. Not healing, closing as if invisible hands were pulling the skin together. Within 5 minutes, there were only faint pink lines. Within 10 minutes, even those had faded to nothing. Wu Jin looked up at Beiho with apologetic eyes and gestured that he was fine. But Beiho saw something else in the boy's expression, a sadness, as if he knew this moment had changed things between them. That evening, as Beiho sat trying to process what he'd witnessed, the children gathered around him with unusual solemnity. They'd never seemed so human and so alien at the same moment. HFY brought one of his books and pointed to pictures of families, then pointed to Bei-Ho and the three of them. Nari hummed a melody so beautiful and melancholy that tears came to the old farmer's eyes. But it was what happened after sunset that terrified him. Ships appeared in the darkening sky, not the random lights of before, but deliberate craft. Angular and black, they moved without sound, their surfaces seeming to absorb starlight rather than reflect it. They circled the valley in perfect formation, their movement predatory and patient. The children's behavior changed instantly. Their shimmer dimmed to almost nothing, and they pressed close to Bei-Ho with the first real fear he'd seen from them. Wu-Jin pointed at the ships and shook his head violently. HFY grabbed Bei-Ho's arm and pulled him toward the house, but it was Nari who broke the silence they'd maintained for a month. "Appa," she whispered, her voice small and scared but perfectly clear in Korean. "They want to take us back." The ships descended at dawn, like black tears falling from a grey sky. 3 of them landed in Bei-Ho's cabbage field, their angular hulls crushing his carefully tended rows without care. No sound came from their engines, no heat distorted the air around them. They simply settled onto his earth as if gravity had no meaning to them. Bei-Ho had spent the night preparing. His old hunting rifle was cleaned and loaded, positioned by the kitchen window with a clear view of the field. The children huddled in the back room, their shimmer barely visible now, as if they were trying to make themselves invisible. Nari hadn't stopped humming since the ships appeared, but her melody had changed to something that sounded like a prayer. The beings that emerged from the ships made Bei-Ho's skin crawl. They stood nearly 3 meters tall on thin, jointed legs that bent wrong, like grasshoppers walking upright. Their torsos were covered in dark, chitinous armor that clicked when they moved. Most disturbing were their heads, elongated skulls with multifaceted eyes that reflected light like broken mirrors, and mandibles that moved constantly, creating a sound like branches scraping against windows. 6 of them approached his house, in formation, their movements perfectly synchronized. Behind them, more shapes moved within the ships, mechanical things with glowing red sensors and arms that ended in wicked claws. The lead being carried a device that pulsed with blue light, some kind of translator or communicator. Bei-Ho stepped onto his porch, rifle in hand but not yet raised. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his hands were steady. 40 years. Dove mountain hunting had taught him patience. You don't shoot until you're sure of your target. The lead creature stopped 10 meters away and activated its device. When it spoke, the words came out in stilted mechanical Korean that made Bei-Ho's teeth ache. "Human farmer, you harbor property of the collective. Return breeding specimens immediately." Bei-Ho had practiced this moment in his mind all night, but hearing the cold dismissal in that artificial voice still made anger bloom in his chest. "These are my children. You cannot have them." The creature's mandibles spread wide, creating what might have been laughter, but sounded like breaking glass. "Primitive. Your species understands nothing. These are keepers, psychic amplifiers bred for our purposes. Their world has been harvested. They belong to us." Behind Bei-Ho, the door opened softly. Wu-Jin emerged, no longer looking like a child despite his small size. His young face was set with a resolve that reminded Bei-Ho of soldiers he'd known in his military days. The boy walked forward until he stood beside the old farmer, unafraid. "We belong to no one," Wu-Jin said in perfect Korean, his voice carrying a strength that made the alien's translator crackle. "This human showed us kindness. We choose to stay." The lead creature's multifaceted eyes focused on Wu-Jin with predatory intensity. Its mandibles clicked rapidly, and Bei-Ho could hear excitement in the sound. "Specimen has developed advanced linguistic capabilities ahead of schedule. Excellent. Breeding program exceeded expectations." More beings began emerging from the ships now. Some looked like the insect creatures, but others were different. Floating spheres covered in spikes, 4-armed beings with skin like molten metal, and worst of all, humanoid figures in powered armor that moved with mechanical precision. They formed a loose circle around Bei-Ho's property, cutting off any escape routes. "Your resistance is noted but irrelevant," the leader continued. "These specimens represent years of genetic modification and psychic enhancement. They will serve." their purpose in our expansion across this galaxy. Surrender them now, and your death will be quick. Haywan and Nari joined them on the porch. The three children stood together, their shimmer beginning to brighten despite their obvious fear. Nari's humming grew louder, and Beho noticed that the alien's translator began emitting static whenever her voice peaked. "You made one mistake," Beho said, raising his rifle slowly and deliberately. "You threatened my family." The alien leaders, head tilted with mechanical curiosity. "You would challenge the collective with primitive projectile weapons. Your species' stupidity is remarkable." "Maybe," Beho said, his finger finding the trigger. "But we're also stubborn." The leader gestured to its companions. "Take them, kill the human." That's when several things happened at once. Wu Jin stepped forward, his young face suddenly fierce, and pointed at the nearest alien scout. The creature stumbled backward as if struck by an invisible force, its multifaceted eyes flickering with confusion. Haywan raised his hands, and somehow the mechanical soldier's red sensors began sparking and going dark one by one. Nari's humming reached a crescendo that made the alien translator devices screech with feedback, but it was Beho who acted first. His rifle cracked across the morning air, the bullet taking the leader center mass. The creature's chitinous armor cracked, dark fluid spattering the ground behind it. The old farmer had been aiming for center mass, and 40 years of hunting had made him deadly accurate. The leader staggered but didn't fall, its mandibles spreading in what was definitely rage now. Impossible. Primitive weapons cannot penetrate collective armor. Beho worked the bolt action smoothly, ejecting the spent casing. "That was just to get your attention," he said grimly. "This one's for threatening my kids." The second shot took the creature in its largest eye cluster. This time it went down and stayed down. The moment Beho's second shot dropped their leader, chaos erupted across his farm. The remaining aliens scattered with inhuman speed, their coordinated formation breaking apart as they sought cover behind his equipment shed and stone walls. But they had made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. Kim Beho hadn't always been a simple mountain farmer. 25 years ago, he had been Sergeant Kim Beho, Republic of Korea Army Special Forces. 3 tours in places the government never talked about publicly. Decorated marksman, survival specialist, and guerrilla warfare expert. The mountains of Gangwon Province weren't just his home, they were his fortress, and he knew every rock, tree, and hiding spot within 5 kilometers. The aliens regrouped quickly, their mechanical soldiers advancing in precise lines while the insect-like beings provided covering fire with energy weapons that turned his vegetable garden into smoking craters. But Beho had vanished along with the children, disappearing into terrain he had been preparing for exactly this kind of fight for decades. His first trap caught 2 mechanical soldiers as they rounded the corner of his chicken coop. A tripwire released a deadfall of heavy stones that crushed their sensor arrays and left them sparking uselessly in the dirt. The aliens learned quickly that this human's property was more dangerous than it appeared. From his concealed position in the tree, Blind Beho picked off stragglers with careful measured shots. Each bullet counted. He had maybe 50 rounds total for his hunting rifle, plus his grandfather's old pistol with 2 spare magazines. Against an alien invasion force, it should have been hopeless. But the children changed everything. Wu Jin had developed an incredible ability to sense approaching enemies through some kind of psychic connection to the local wildlife. Birds and small animals became his early warning system, their behavior alerting him to alien movements long before they came into visual range. He would tap Beho's shoulder and point in precise directions, allowing the old soldier to set up perfect ambush positions. Haywan's power was even more remarkable. The quiet boy could somehow bend light around them, creating patches of distortion that made them nearly invisible when they needed to move between positions. More than once, alien search parties passed, within meters of their hiding spots without detecting them. The boy's ability seemed to work best when he was calm and focused, his eyes taking on an otherworldly gleam as he manipulated the very air around them. But it was Nari who proved most devastating to their technological enemies. Her wordless songs had evolved into something that actively disrupted alien equipment. When she hummed in certain frequencies, Their energy weapons misfired, their communication devices produced only static, and their mechanical soldiers stumbled around like broken toys. She discovered she could target specific devices, her melodies becoming weapons as precise as any rifle. The first day was the hardest. The aliens came in waves, testing his defenses with probing attacks, while their ships circled overhead like metal vultures. Beho led them through a maze of improvised obstacles, tripwires connected to farming tools that became projectiles, concealed pits covered with canvas and leaves, and deadfalls positioned at choke points where the terrain forced them into single file. By the second day, the alien ground forces had learned to respect the old farmer's tactical skills. They began using their superior technology more carefully, sending floating drone scouts ahead of their main forces and coordinating attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. But Beho adapted, using hit-and-run tactics that had been refined over years of mountain warfare. The children's abilities grew stronger under pressure. Wu Jin began predicting alien movements minutes in advance, his connection to the natural world expanding to include insects and even the mountain wind itself. Haiwan learned to create not just invisibility, but actual illusions, false images that sent alien squads chasing shadows while the real targets escaped in other directions. Nari's songs became a symphony of electronic warfare, capable of shutting down entire sections of alien equipment simultaneously. The third day brought their most desperate battle. The aliens had received reinforcements, larger ships, heavier weapons, and creatures that looked like living tanks covered in organic armor. They began systematically destroying the terrain itself, using energy cannons to clear away Beho's carefully prepared defensive positions. That night, huddled in a cave system he had discovered as a child, Beho treated a laser burn on his shoulder while the children slept fitfully against him. His ammunition was nearly gone, his traps had been cleared or destroyed, and more alien ships were arriving every hour. Through gaps in the cave entrance, he could see the glow of their searchlights painting the mountainside. The fourth morning brought the sound he had been dreading, the heavy footsteps of those tank-like creatures systematically searching every hiding place on his property. His rifle had 6 bullets left, his pistol was empty, and the aliens had learned to counter most of the children's abilities. Nari woke first, her eyes bright with tears. "Appa," she whispered, using the Korean word for father that had become precious to him. "We're sorry, this is our fault." Beho pulled all 3 children close, his weathered hands gentle despite the calluses and cuts. "No," he said firmly. "You are my children now. I protect my family, always." That's when he remembered his grandfather's old radio, the emergency transmitter he had kept functional more from habit than necessity. His hands shook as he connected the ancient equipment, praying the battery still held enough charge. "This is Kim Beho, grid reference 127.3, 37.8, he transmitted into the static. "I need help protecting my children." The message went out on emergency frequencies, carried by atmospheric conditions across the Korean peninsula to a military communication station in Seoul. Within minutes, it was being analyzed by intelligence, officers who recognized the grid coordinates and cross-referenced them with satellite imagery, showing unknown aircraft over a remote mountain farm. Within an hour, Kim Beho's desperate plea had reached the Blue House, the Pentagon, and military command centers around the world. The first helicopter arrived within 6 hours of Beho's transmission, a military scout that circled his valley and reported back what no one wanted to believe: alien ships engaged in active combat with a single human defender. By sunset, the mountain roads that had been empty for decades suddenly filled with an endless stream of vehicles. They came in waves that shocked even the battle-hardened alien forces. First were the soldiers, Korean Special Forces, American, Marines from the base in Seoul, Japanese defense units crossing the sea. Their helicopters filled the sky like angry hornets, while armored vehicles climbed mountain paths that had never seen military traffic. But it wasn't just soldiers who answered Beho's call. News crews had picked up fragments of military communications, and within hours the story exploded across social media. An old farmer alone on a mountain, protecting 3 alien children from an invasion force. The images captured by long-range cameras showed the impossible. energy weapons lighting up a small farm, while one elderly man with a hunting rifle held them off. Minho, a taxi driver from Seoul, loaded his car with medical supplies and drove through the night. Young-suk, a grandmother from Busan, organized her entire neighborhood to bring food and blankets. University students abandoned their classes, teachers left their schools, and office workers called in sick to join what the internet had dubbed the March to Beho. By the second day, the aliens found themselves facing something their tactical computers couldn't process. The single target had become thousands. Civilians formed human chains, stretching from the main road to Beho's farm, passing supplies hand to hand under alien fire. When energy beams struck the crowd, people scattered, regrouped, and kept coming. Park Dae-jung, a construction worker from Incheon, drove his bulldozer up the mountain and began building earthworks to protect the civilians. Choi Yeon-hee, a veterinarian from Daegu, set up a field medical station in Beho's barn. Song Min-jae, a tech engineer, somehow managed to jam alien communications using equipment built from car radios and cell phone towers. The alien commander, a massive creature with 4 arms and skin like living metal, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his tactical displays with growing confusion. His forces were designed to overwhelm isolated targets through superior technology and coordinated strikes. But the humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They were protecting something, and that changed everything. When his shock troops advanced, civilians threw themselves between the aliens and the farm. When his drones attacked, humans shot them down with hunting rifles and improvised weapons. When his ships bombed supply lines, new ones formed within hours. Most disturbing of all, his psychological warfare specialists reported that human morale was actually increasing under fire. Military analysts from around the world studied the alien technology through long-range sensors and captured equipment. Dr. Lee Sung-min, Korea's leading xenobiologist, examined alien corpses and declared their biology fascinating but not invulnerable. Colonel Roberts from the U.S. Space Command coordinated international response while marveling at how quickly humanity had united around 3 children most people had never seen. The children themselves had become symbols broadcast across every network on Earth. Woo Jin, brave and determined, standing beside Beho with a wooden stick as his weapon. Hae-won, quiet and thoughtful, his strange abilities helping coordinate human defenses. Nari singing her wordless songs that somehow made everyone who heard them feel hopeful despite the chaos around them. On the 5th day, something unprecedented happened. The alien commander received a transmission from Earth's hastily assembled United Nations Emergency Council. Ambassador Kim Hye-jin, speaking for all of humanity, delivered a message that would echo across the galaxy. Those children are under our protection. Leave now or face the consequences. The alien commander's response was immediate. Surrender the specimens, or we will reduce your cities to ash. Humanity's reply came not in words but in actions. Every major military on Earth mobilized simultaneously. Nuclear submarines surfaced in coordinated formations. Fighter jets filled the skies above every major city. Missile batteries that had been hidden for decades revealed themselves and turned toward the stars. Most shocking of all, civilians around the world began gathering in massive demonstrations, all sending the same message. We protect our children. All of them. The alien commander, faced with a planet-wide military response and billions of humans united in defiance, transmitted a coded message to his superiors in the collective. Target planet shows unprecedented pack-bonding behavior. Species demonstrates willingness to engage in total warfare to protect offspring, including non-biological offspring. Tactical assessment, conquest probability less than 12%. Casualties would be catastrophic. Recommend immediate reclassification. The response came within hours. Planet Earth designated protected sanctuary status. Withdraw all forces immediately. Mark system as unsuitable for harvesting operations. As alien ships retreated beyond Earth's atmosphere, something beautiful happened on Beho's mountain. The crowds that had come to fight stayed to celebrate. Soldiers helped rebuild his damaged farm. Civilians planted new crops to replace what had been destroyed. Engineers installed communication equipment, so the old farmer would never be cut off again. Woo Jin, Hae-won, and Nari officially became Kim Woo-jin, Kim Hae-won, and Kim Nari, adopted through emergency legislation that made them full Korean citizens. They grew up surrounded by love from around the world, learning to be human while never forgetting their origins. Years later, when other ships arrived in Earth's skies, they came not as conquerors, but as refugees. Species fleeing the collective, families seeking sanctuary, children who needed protection, and every time they found the same response that had saved 3 infants in a cabbage field. Kim Bae-ho, no longer alone on his mountain, would greet each new arrival with the same words, "Welcome to Earth, here we protect our children." The end.